Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Tuesday, April 8th, and for today's headlines we have China vows retaliation in a fight to the end after Trump's latest tariff threat. Health Secretary R.K. Jr. endorses the MMR vaccine, stoking fury among his supporters. Supreme Court clears way for Venezuelan deportations to resume for now. Colombia's former leader faced contentious interview after resigning. Bloomberg pumps cash into long-term legal fight against Trump. China vows retaliation in a fight to the end after Trump's latest tariff threat. China said on Tuesday it will not back down in the face of President Trump's fresh threat to impose an additional 50% tariff on Chinese imports as the trade war between the world's top two economies intensifies. Trump said on Truth Social he would impose a new tariff on China if Beijing did not retract the 34% retaliatory tariff on U.S. goods that it announced in response to Trump's initial salvo last Wednesday. In a strongly worded statement, China's Commerce Ministry said the country will resolutely take countermeasures to safeguard its rights and interests. The U.S. tariff escalation threat against China compounds its mistake and further exposed its nature of blackmail, which China will never accept, the statement said. China will fight to the end if the U.S. side is bent on going down the wrong path. Global equity markets have been pummeled as recession fears have grown following Trump's Liberation Day announcement of tariffs that affect most countries across the world and most U.S. imports. On Tuesday, however, Asian stock markets took a breather after heavy losses on Monday. Key indexes in Japan, Hong Kong, and South Korea were up. In China, stocks rose to amid reports that state-backed investors known as the National Team were on a buying spree to prop up the market. If Trump follows through, the U.S. will have hit Chinese imports this year with combined new tariffs at 104%. Trump imposed 20% in tariffs in the first weeks of his presidency, and an additional 34% on Wednesday. According to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, the U.S. imported $438.9 billion in goods from China last year, up 2.8% from 2023. Gabriel Wildau, a managing director at the consultancy Tinao, and he expects Beijing to hunker down for a protracted economic war of attrition. The strategy of patented resistance is based on a conviction that 7 years of efforts will reduce reliance on the U.S. and has rendered China economically resilient to the trade war now underway, Wildau wrote in a note. China's leaders believe that over the long term, Trump is ill-equipped to withstand the political pressure that his tariff policies will generate. China stands out in Asia for its willingness to go toe-to-toe with the United States. Leaders from other countries have decried the tariffs but avoided retaliation, opting instead to lean into the possibility of negotiations with Washington. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te said on Monday that Taiwan has no plans to adopt retaliatory tariffs. He says Taiwan would seek to purchase more American products and lower non-tariff barriers. Hong Kong, which is part of China but considered a different trade jurisdiction, has not followed Beijing's lead with tariffs on U.S. goods. Major U.S. trading partners India, Japan, and South Korea have also refrained from retaliatory measures. Vietnam, which is being hit by one of the highest tariff rates, 46%, named a deputy prime minister as special envoy and sent him to the U.S. this week for talks. Hanoi has called for a delay in the implementation of tariffs, which are set to kick in on Wednesday, pending negotiations. The European Commission, the EU executive body, is among the few major U.S. trade partners openly considering countermeasures. At the same time, it has sought negotiations and offered to eliminate tariffs on industrial goods if the U.S. agrees to roll back its tariffs. On Tuesday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen had a call with Chinese Premier Li Qiang, the company's number 2 leader. The statement from the Commission said von der Leyen called for a negotiated resolution to the current situation, emphasizing the need to avoid further escalation. Health Secretary R.F.K. Jr. endorses the MMR vaccine, stoking fury among his supporters. An endorsement of the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine by Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has provoked an angry outcry from anti-vaccine activists. The most effective way to prevent the spread of measles is the MMR vaccine, Kennedy said in the third paragraph of a lengthy post on the social media platform X. Kennedy made the post following meetings on Sunday in Gaines County, Texas, with the families of 2 children who have died of measles during a recent outbreak in the state. He also said he instructed the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention to supply pharmacies and Texas-run clinics with needed MMR vaccines, along with other medical supplies. Kennedy's endorsement is in line with all available scientific evidence on the MMR vaccine. A single dose is roughly 93% effective at preventing illness, and the second dose gets that up to 97%, said Dr. Paul Offit, director of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. According to the Texas Department of State Health Services, just 10 of the 481 measles cases reported as of April 4th were in partially or fully vaccinated individuals. That's around 2% of overall cases. So far, 3 unvaccinated people, with 2 children in Texas and an adult in New Mexico, have died from the disease. I'm delighted to hear what Secretary Kennedy has said about giving the vaccination, said Dr. Catherine Edwards, a retired professor of pediatric infectious disease. Edwards said she hoped for an explicit endorsement of the vaccine much earlier in January, but that it's better late than never. But Kennedy's suggestion that the vaccine was effective infuriated several members of the anti-vaccine community, who responded on X to the statement. I came to Gaines County, Texas today to comfort the Hillebrand family after the loss of their 8-year-old daughter, Daisy. I got to know the family of 6-year-old Kaylee Fair after she passed away in February. I also developed bonds with and deep affection for other members of the community. I'm sorry, but we voted for challenging the medical establishment, not parroting it. Anti-vaccine anger. I'm sorry, but there's no defense for this poorly worded statement, wrote Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, a prominent anti-vaccine activist who once claimed during a legislative hearing in Ohio that the COVID vaccine would cause patients to become magnetized, allowing them to stick spoons and forks all over their bodies. Del Bigtree, a prominent anti-vaccine activist who supported Kennedy's presidential run and recently co-founded a nonprofit with him called MAHA Action, which also questioned the health secretary's endorsement. Bigtree suggested that Kennedy's post had got cut off. He then went on to make unproven claims about vaccine and autism and linked to a documentary he had made on the topic. We voted for challenging the medical establishment, not parroting it, posted Dr. Mary Talley Bodwin, a Texas-based physician who had opposed COVID vaccines and currently fighting the complaint from Texas Medical Board over hospital admitting privileges. Bowen says the complaint is related to her prescribing patients ivermectin. Ivermectin is an unproven alternative therapy for COVID. Kennedy was one of those candidates that attracted people who might not vote for Trump, Bowen told NPR in an interview. Much of the attraction was from people who were very fed up with what happened during the pandemic, she says. Neither Biden or Trump were willing to even talk about the pandemic, and Kennedy was, she says. She said Kennedy's decision to endorse the MMR vaccine to control the outbreak reminds her of a heavy-handed response to COVID. Do we need to make a proclamation? Okay, this is what needs to be done, she says. That's what rubs me the wrong way. Kennedy's statement also contradicts years of his own vaccine skepticism. The health secretary formerly chaired an anti-vax nonprofit called Children's Health Defense that during a measles outbreak in 2019 tried to sue New York over the state school's vaccine requirement. It ultimately lost the case. In 2023, during an interview with the popular podcaster Joe Rogan, Kennedy denied that the measles vaccine had led to drops in deaths. He claimed that malnutrition was the cause of measles deaths, and that by the time the vaccine debuted in 1963, mortality was already low. The few deaths that did occur were all kids in the Mississippi Delta, black kids, severely malnourished, and they were dying of measles, he told Rogan. Kennedy did not cite any evidence for that claim. In his new role, the health secretary has occasionally acknowledged the efficacy of the MMR shots. Vaccines not only protect individual children from measles, but also contribute to community immunity, protecting those who are unable to be vaccinated due to medical reasons, he wrote in an op-ed on Fox News on March 2nd. But in the same post, Kennedy claimed vitamin A can dramatically reduce measles mortality. Offit says vitamin A does not affect the disease's course in developed nations like the United States, and that it can damage children's livers in large doses. Texas public media reported that several children in West Texas were hospitalized with vitamin A toxicity following his Fox News statement. Alternative therapies. It was unclear why Kennedy chose this moment to explicitly endorse the MMR shot. The Department of Health and Human Services did not immediately respond to NPR's request for comment. In a second post later Sunday evening, Kennedy posted pictures posing with families of those who had lost children and prompted two therapies, aerosols budesonide and clarithromycin. Budesonide is an inhaled steroid used to treat asthma and has no role in measles, Offit says. Clarithromycin is an oral antibiotic, but Offit says it's the wrong kind of antibiotic for treating secondary bacterial infections caused by measles. Both of those things are valueless, he says. Offit says that despite Kennedy's online endorsement, he expects the measles outbreak to continue and possibly worsen. This is a massive outbreak that is not being controlled, Offit said. Measles was eliminated in the U.S. in 2000, but it's killing children again. I've never been more upset. It's just so hard to watch this. Supreme Court clears way for Venezuelan deportations to resume, for now. A majority of the justices concluded that the Venezuelan migrants had brought their case to the wrong court, but that they were entitled to an opportunity to challenge their removal. The Supreme Court ruled on Monday night that the Trump administration could continue to deport Venezuelan migrants using the Wartime Powers Act for now, overturning a lower court that had put a temporary stop on the deportations. The decision marks a victory for the Trump administration, although the ruling did not address the constitutionality of using the Alien Enemies Act to send the migrants to a prison in El Salvador. The justices instead issued a narrow procedural ruling, saying that migrants' lawyers had filed their lawsuit in the wrong court. The justices said it should have been filed in Texas, where the Venezuelans are being held, rather than a court in Washington. All 9 justices agreed that the Venezuelan migrants detained in the United States must receive advance notice and that the opportunity to challenge their deportation before they could be removed, Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh wrote in a concurrence. The spin among the court was over where and how that should happen. The detainees are confined in Texas. The venue is improper in the District of Columbia, according to a court's order, which was brief and unsigned, as is typical in such emergency applications. The justices wrote that the Venezuelan migrants must be told that they were subject to removal under the Alien Enemies Act within a reasonable time for them to challenge their removal before they are deported. That finding could impose significant new restrictions on how the Trump administration might attempt to use the act in the future. President Trump wrote on social media that he viewed the decision as a victory. The Supreme Court has upheld the rule of law in our nation by allowing a president, whomever that may be able to secure our borders and protect our families and our country itself, Mr. Trump wrote in his Truth Social account. A great day for justice in America. Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote in a dissent that the majority's legal conclusion was suspect, adding that the court had intervened to grant the administration extraordinary relief without mentioning the grave harm that the migrants would face if they were erroneously removed to El Salvador. The court should not reward the government's efforts to erode the rule of law, Justice Sotomayor wrote. She was joined in dissent by the court's 2 other liberal justices, Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson. Justice Amy Coney Barrett joined in part. In a separate dissent, Justice Jackson sharply criticized the court's decision to act on the emergency docket, where cases are typically heard quickly without oral argument and full briefing. At least when the court went off base in the past, it left a record so posterity could see how it went wrong, Justice Jackson wrote, citing Korematsu v. United States, a notorious 1944 decision by the court upholding the forcible internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. With more and more of our most significant rulings taking place in the shadows of our emergency docket, today's court leaves less and less of a trace, Justice Jackson wrote. But make no mistake, we are just as wrong now as we have in the past, with similarly devastating consequences. Lawyers for the migrant challenging the deportations were disappointed that they would need to start the court processes over again, in a different court, but counted the ruling as a win, said Lee Gellerant, a lawyer for the American Civil Liberties Union. Mr. Gellerant said that the critical point is that the Supreme Court rejected the government's position that it does not even have to give individuals meaningful advance notice so they can challenge their removal under the Alien Enemies Act. He added, "That is a huge victory." The case is perhaps the most high-profile of the 9 emergency applications the Trump administration has filed with the Supreme Court so far, and it presents a direct collision between the judicial and executive branches. The administration had asked the justices to weigh in on its efforts to use the Alien Enemies Act, a 1798 law, to deport more than 100 Venezuelans it claims that are members of Tren de Aragua, a violent street gang rooted in Venezuela. The administration argues that their removals are allowed under the Act, which grants the president authority to detain or deport citizens of enemy nations. The president may invoke the law in times of declared war or when a foreign government invades the United States. On March 14th, Mr. Trump signed a proclamation that targeted members of Tren de Aragua, claiming that there was an invasion and a predatory incursion underway. In the proclamation, Mr. Trump claimed that the gang was undertaking hostile actions against the United States at the direction, clandestine or otherwise, of the Venezuelan government. Lawyers representing some of those targeted challenged the order in federal court in Washington. The same day, plane holds of the deportees were sent to El Salvador, which had entered an agreement with the Trump administration to take the Venezuelans and detain them. A federal judge, James E. Boasberg, directed the administration to stop the flights. He subsequently issued a written order temporarily pausing the administration's plans while the court case proceeded. The administration appealed Judge Boasberg's temporary restraining order, and a divided panel of 3 appellate court judges in Washington sided with the migrants, keeping the pause in place. One judge wrote that the government's deportation plan had denied the Venezuelans even a gossamer thread of due process. At that point, the Trump administration asked the Supreme Court to weigh in, arguing in its application that the case presented fundamental questions about who decides how to conduct sensitive national security-related operations in this country. Lawyers for the migrants responded sharply, arguing that the temporary pause by Judge Boasberg was the only thing standing in the way of the government sending migrants to a prison in El Salvador, perhaps never to be seen again, without any kind of procedural protection, much less judicial review. The American Civil Liberties Union and Democracy Forward, the groups representing the Venezuelan migrants, said the president had bent the law in an effort to shoehorn a criminal gang into the wartime law in a manner that was completely at odds with the limited delegation of wartime authority Congress chose to give him through the statute. Lawyers for the migrants said the deportees sent to El Salvador had been confined incommunicado in one of the most brutal prisons in the world, where torture and other human rights abuses are rampant. The Trump administration replied on Wednesday in a brief that contended that the government was not denying that the Venezuelan migrants should receive judicial review. They obviously do, the acting Solicitor General Sarah M. Harris wrote. Rather, the government argued that pressing issues right now and procedural issues about where and how detainees should challenge their designations as enemy aliens. Ms. Harris argued that the migrants should have filed their legal challenges in Texas, where they had been detained before the deportation flights, rather than in Washington. She asked the justices to lift the temporary block on Mr. Trump's order, causing the pause an intolerably long time for a court to block the executive conduct of a foreign policy and national security operations. Ms. Harris claimed that the migrants' lawyers had offered a sensationalized narrative. She added that the government denied that the migrants might face torture in El Salvador, writing that the government's position is to abhor torture, not to invite brutalization. Colombia's former leader faced a contentious interview after resigning. Dr. Katrina Armstrong told a federal task force she could not remember details from the university's report on anti-Semitism or her response to its recommendations. Four days after stepping down as Columbia University's interim president, Dr. Katrina Armstrong testified in a contentious closed-door deposition in Washington that she did not remember specifics from Columbia's own report on anti-Semitism and had trouble describing how she had responded to its recommendations. It has been a very, very, very challenging year, she said, according to a transcript that was posted online and confirmed as authentic by the government official. I do not have specific recollection sitting here of what is in this report or what I can recall from this report. During several hours of questioning conducted last Tuesday by the acting general counsel of the Department of Health and Human Services as part of an investigation into anti-Semitism at Columbia, Dr. Armstrong repeatedly said that the past year has been such a blur that she has trouble remembering details. The transcript was leaked to the Washington Free Beacon, a conservative publication which first published it on Sunday. Also on Sunday, Columbia's medical school announced that Dr. Armstrong would be taking a sabbatical to spend time with her family, instead of returning to her role as the chief executive of the medical center had been announced. The testimony comes at a highly sensitive time for Columbia. The university is trying to convince the Trump administration that it is responding seriously to White House demands to do more to fight anti-Semitism on campus. Trump officials had already cut about $400 million in federal research funding to Columbia, and have told the school that negotiations to restore the grants will begin only if the school meets certain conditions. In a letter sent on March 21st to federal officials, the university agreed to take steps to rein in demonstrations and increase oversight of its Middle East Studies Department, among other concessions. Until Dr. Armstrong stepped down a week later, the negotiations were taking place under her oversight. Columbia's Board of Trustees released a statement Sunday distancing itself from Dr. Armstrong's testimony. This testimony does not reflect the hard work undertaken by university to combat anti-Semitism, harassment, and discrimination and ensure the safety and well-being of our community, the trustees said, adding that they were firmly committed to resolving the issues raised by our federal regulators with respect to discrimination, harassment, and anti-Semitism, and implementing the policy changes and commitments outlined in our March 21st letter. The hearing transcript provided a glimpse inside of a tension between Columbia and representatives of the Trump administration multi-agency anti-Semitism task force, which is investigating at least 10 universities in an effort to root out what it sees as disturbing anti-Semitic activity on campuses. A task force was not satisfied with Dr. Armstrong's testimony, finding her answers evasive and lacking in seriousness. It was also dismayed that she could not recall any incidents in which Jewish students had been harassed on campus, according to a government official familiar with the task force thinking, who spoke on the condition of anonymity because the official was not authorized to discuss internal matters. Sean R. Kaveny, the Health and Human Services lawyer who had led the questioning for the task force, repeatedly became frustrated with Dr. Armstrong's failure to remember whether she had heard about specific anti-Semitic incidents, such as an allegation from Jewish students that they had been spit on, the transcript shows. I'm just trying to understand how you have such a terrible memory of specific incidents of anti-Semitism when you're clearly an intelligent doctor, Mr. Kaveny said. He also delved into a controversy that directly preceded Dr. Armstrong's resignation as interim president. In the days after Columbia officials committed to tightening protest policies and oversight, Dr. Armstrong appeared to play down those changes in a faculty meeting, a transcript of which was leaked to the news media. Mr. Kaveny asked her about that meeting, saying, "Isn't it true that in private with the faculty, you backed away from what you said the university was going to do?" Dr. Armstrong responded that while she did not recall exactly what she had said, that had not been her intent. To the degree that there was any impression in my language or any confusion, I put out a public statement making it very clear that I was deeply and fully committed to the steps in the statement, she said. Dr. Armstrong also testified that becoming Columbia's interim leader after Namat Shafiq abruptly resigned as president last August had led to the most challenging year of her life. In personal admission, she said the reason she had decided to accept the job was that her 3 college-age children had urged her to. I initially said no, she testified, and then my kids got up, actually, because it happened all at like 9 in the morning, and then my kids got up and said, "Mom, you have to do it." Also on Sunday, Angela Violonito, the Columbia provost, wrote in an email to the campus that the government had revoked the visas of 4 international students, part of a wave of self-revocations at universities across the country. She did not provide any information about their identities. The university had not been informed of the revocations, but had learned about them over the previous 2 days by checking the government database, she wrote. Last month, the Department of Homeland Security revoked the visas and green cards of several Columbia students, including 2 legal permanent residents, Maulud Khalil, a recent graduate of the School of International and Public Affairs, and Yeonsun Chung, an undergraduate who had lived in the United States since childhood. Bloomberg pumps cash into the long-term legal fight against Trump. The billionaire's gun control group plans to spend $10 million to help elect Democratic attorney general who are on the front lines of legal clashes with the president. Michael R. Bloomberg's gun control plans to spend $10 million to help elect Democratic attorneys generals this year, and in 2026, an investment it says is meant to help protect the rule of law and democracy while President Trump holds the White House. The group, Every Town for Gun Safety, will back Democratic candidates in 10 competitive states, including Virginia this fall, and Arizona, Georgia, Minnesota, Nevada, and Wisconsin, among others, next year, according to John Feinbach, the organization's president. The pledged spending from a group fueled by Mr. Bloomberg, the former New York mayor and Democratic mega donor, is notable because of its apparent reluctance to put his money behind Vice President Kamala Harris last year. He spent millions resisting entries to donate, though fellow billionaires persuaded him to give $50 million in late October to a nonprofit group supporting her campaign. Everytown has for years spent money on down-ballot efforts to elect Democratic candidates for state legislators, particularly in places where gun control measures had a chance of being enacted, and where smaller sums of money could have an influence on races. Mr. Feinblatt said that his group's push to support attorney generals, which will be called the Everytown Rule of Law Fund, would focus on defending states from actions by the Trump administration more than on serving as an offensive playbook for enacting gun control measures. Attorney General are trying to protect the rule of law, Mr. Feinblatt said. They're trying to protect the things that are in every basic textbook of American democracy, he added. We want to make sure that the AGs know that groups like us will support them if they do the right thing. We want them to know that we have their back today, and we will have their backs in 2026. Democratic attorney generals have filed a series of lawsuits against the Trump administration's efforts to shutter federal agencies and withhold funding to states. While Democrats in the minority in both chambers of Congress and the Trump administration staffed by loyalists aiming to root out public and private dissent, the courts are liberals' main venue for meaningful opposition to the president. Mr. Bloomberg's recent spending on politics pales in comparison to his past outlays. In the 2020 general election, he spent $173 million to elect Joseph R. Biden Jr., $100 million in Florida alone. Earlier that cycle, Mr. Bloomberg spent more than $1 billion trying to win the Democratic presidential primary race for himself, a failed effort in which he won just 59 delegates and placed first only in the American Samoa caucuses. Mr. Feinblatt said he did not have any regrets about Mr. Bloomberg's limited level of investment in the election last year. There was a ton of money spent in 2024, he said. I don't think money was the issue. Everytown has spent about $5 million backing Attorney General since 2027, Mr. Feinblatt said, including $500,000 each in 2022 to back the re-election bids for Dana Nelson and Aaron Ford, the Democratic Attorney Generals of Michigan and Nevada. This spring, the group spent $553,000 to air television ads backing the Liberal candidate for the Wisconsin Supreme Court in the final month of that $100 million campaign. The candidate, Susan Crawford, won a decisive victory to keep Liberals in control of the battleground state's top court. That is all for today. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye!